Hello, and welcome to Night Sleep Stories, a place where we listen, unwind, and gently drift toward sleep. I'm your host, Arthur. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we'll begin a dreamy retelling of a classic tale, Beauty and the Beast. It's a perfectly autumnal story to ease you into a peaceful night's rest. Relaxation before sleep. Let's take a brief moment to settle in and release any lingering unease from body and mind. Make yourself comfortable, and as you ease into stillness, allow each breath to lengthen a little, especially on the exhale. Keep your attention, as best you can, on the breath. Let the slow, steady rhythm of the airflow become a mindful, soothing experience. When I speak to you before each story, I try to say the things I know I'd want to hear if I were drifting off to this show. I've found the process of falling asleep particularly difficult at many times in my life. I still have rough patches now and then, but I've gradually learned to stay calm and not let it worry me on those hard nights. Yes, it can make the next day a good bit more challenging, but getting worked up about it only invites more wakefulness. So, as you listen along tonight, you can use your breath to gently pacify any stress, tension, or worry. It's a simple yet effective way to settle the nervous system and guide you toward a beautiful night's sleep. And that's especially true when you pair those deeper breaths with a dreamy bedtime story like this one. It's a tale as old as time. So, without further ado, drift into the fairy tale world of Beauty and the Beast, a gentle place for rest, comfort, and calm attention. There once lived a merchant named Laurent, who risked his entire fortune on a fleet of ships only to lose them all at sea. Being a widower, he did not have to bring this news home to a wife. Yet he had 6 children who had grown accustomed to a life of relative privilege. When the debts were called in and rumors spread that the family was destitute, most of the children took the news hard. As days turned into weeks and the ships never returned to harbor, the merchant was forced to begin selling their fine furniture, their carriage, and even his daughter's jewelry and expensive gowns. They had to abandon their richly appointed house and move into a small cottage on the outskirts of town. Laurent was frequently away, visiting contacts and trying to find partners who might invest and help him rebuild his enterprise. While he traveled, his children, 3 boys and 3 girls, were left to keep the house on their own. Although they were practically grown, the 3 sons and the 2 eldest daughters were mostly useless when it came to practical tasks. They were too used to a life of study and luxury. The youngest daughter, whose name was Camille, was the most willing to take on the household chores now that they were without servants. Perhaps it was her impressionable age, or perhaps it was simply that she had a sweeter, more steady nature. Whatever the reason, Camille did her best to learn household basics. Unlike her siblings, she was genuinely liked by the people in the village. Laurent's brood did not otherwise have many friends. To make matters worse, the 5 older children made no effort to adapt to their new situation. They did nothing to prove themselves capable, nor to endear themselves to the neighbors who might have offered help. Camille, however, sought advice from the villagers about unfamiliar tasks such as baking, sewing, gardening, and keeping chickens. Their initial caution gave way to true affection when they recognized her willingness to learn and work. Over time, she became the glue that held Laurent's household together. While the 5 older siblings struggled to accept their fate and were unable to change, Camille made sure they had a tidy home and that meals were always on the table. One day, when the family had been living this way for nearly 2 years, Laurent received word that one of his lost ships had returned to the port, its cargo largely intact. The family rejoiced at this miraculous news, the older 5 siblings declaring that their days among the villagers were finally at an end. Camille shared in their happiness, but the news did not feel as important to her as it did to the others. She had grown to love their small cottage with its tidy garden and comforting scent of baking bread. Although she was glad her family would be content again, she felt uncertain about returning to their old life of idleness. She had become a person who valued being useful. To reclaim his property, Laurent had to travel to the port by horseback, a journey of a couple of days. Once there, he could arrange for the proper dispersal of his recovered wealth and hire a comfortable coach to bring him home. In anticipation of their improved fortunes, he asked each of his children what gift they would like from the city. The older siblings demanded finery. They asked for silk shoes with sparkling buckles, hats with elaborate trimmings, velvet capes, pearls, and jewels. Only Camille was silent, thinking very carefully about what she should request. When her father turned to her and told her to speak up, she hesitated briefly. "In truth, Father, I have always dreamed of seeing a rose," she said. "They do not grow in this part of the country, and they are rare and expensive. If you could bring me a single rose in any color, that would be lovely." He chuckled at the unusual wish of his youngest, but he readily agreed. Privately, he thought he would also bring her a necklace or some small trinket to accompany the flower. The weather was fine on the morning of his departure. Camille took care to pack his saddlebag with provisions for the journey, and she wished him farewell with a somewhat tearful smile. Music The others were more casual. They were used to their father's frequent travels. They cared only for the gifts they now expected upon his return. As he rode away down the sun-dappled forest path, Camille alone lingered in front of the cottage until he disappeared. She had a strange feeling of unease, but she pushed it aside. After all, their fortunes had clearly taken a turn for the better. The future felt hopeful. While Laurent's children waited at the cottage, he made his way to the port city, filled with anticipation of reclaiming his wealth and status. It was true that he had suffered heavy losses. However, with the cargo on this ship, he could see to do business, perhaps build up to a new fleet of ships. His mind was filled with spices, silks, and other goods he might import in the future. It was devastating to arrive and find those hopes dashed. It was true the vessel had reappeared with most of its cargo unharmed. However, word had spread quickly of his good fortune, and his many creditors had taken swift action. By the time Laurent arrived to claim his property, it had already been distributed to pay his many debts. In vain, he contacted one merchant after another, asking for extensions on his considerable bills. But it was no use. He was a man without debts, but he was empty-handed. There was no money left for him to invest, and certainly none to spend on the gifts promised to his family. He was so disheartened, he didn't even want to stay in the city overnight. Without properly provisioning himself, considering the weather, or sending any correspondence ahead of him, Laurent mounted his tired horse again and rode out of town, heading back down the provincial road that had brought him to the port that morning. He felt small beneath the weight of sudden misfortune. Laurent was a few hours outside the city when darkness fell and a violent storm swept in. Lightning and thunder crashed all around, and the wind gusted mercilessly, tearing branches from the trees. Laurent's horse grew terrified and bolted away from the main road, carrying him into an unfamiliar forest. Realizing too late that he had been foolish to attempt such a nighttime journey, Laurent searched through the gusting wind for any kind of shelter, even a cave. How long his horse wandered through the howling gale, he did not know. At last, he saw a tall stone wall rise before him. He urged the horse onward, hoping he had reached a house where he might take refuge. Arriving at the forbidding wall of rock, he saw that it was not a house at all. It was the boundary wall of a great estate. A tall and imposing iron gate stood slightly open. Having no time for courtesy, Laurent dismounted and pushed the heavy swinging gate wider to lead his horse through. Together, they made their way along a paved path stretching ahead into the swirling darkness. With leaves flying all around and rain lashing him from all sides, Laurent could barely see the massive structure that loomed ahead in the wicked gloom. It was unmistakably a mansion. Though his visibility was poor, he could see its grand approach and many lofty rooms with tall windows. It was an intimidating sight for one arriving uninvited, but he had no choice. He feared he could not survive the night without a roof over his head. Tying his horse securely in a sheltered alcove, he approached the massive front door and lifted the iron knocker. He let it fall, hearing the sound echo through the hall as if in answer to the thunder. When no reply came, he drew a deep breath and shoved the door inward with all his strength. It yielded, and he nearly stumbled inside onto the floor of a vast entryway. Laurent lay on the cold flagstones for a moment, catching his breath in the eerie stillness. He could still hear the rain lashing the front steps through the crack in the tall door, and he thought how grateful he was that he had found shelter for his horse. Rising in the dimness, he looked around. He was in a grand reception hall with a sweeping staircase curving up on either side. Suits of armor stood sentinel here and there, and ahead of him was a set of richly carved double doors. The silence inside the house was absolute. One might have heard a pin drop, yet a light glowed around the edges of the doors before him. After a few half-hearted attempts to call out to the inhabitants, he drew another deep breath and walked toward the glowing room. Pushing the doors open slowly, he stepped inside and scanned the chamber. A fire roared in the cavernous hearth. Before it stood a table set for one, with a few simple dishes, a carafe, and a large drinking glass spread across its surface. His gaze traveled to other corners of the comfortable room. He saw upholstered chairs and tables piled carelessly with books. Still, there was no sign of the master. Laurent awkwardly sank into one of the armchairs and waited a while. Soon he could not keep his eyes from the dinner laid upon the table. The loaf of bread and the aroma of roasted meat tormented him, and his stomach growled loudly. As the minutes passed and nobody appeared, he at last gave in to his hunger. He seated himself at the table, first taking just a slice of bread and then slowly consuming the entire meal. He passed an hour in contentment. Perhaps, he thought, the master was away from home, sheltering from the storm elsewhere. Taking a drink of the liquid in the glass, he finished the rest of the dinner. Yes, he told himself, the owner was absent, and he would be able to explain everything in the morning. Upon finishing all the food, Laurent leaned happily back in his chair and drank the rest of the contents of the carafe. The fire danced before his eyes, crackling and popping with comforting warmth. Draining the last drop from his large cup, He pulled the letter about his recovered cargo ship from his pocket. Just a short time ago, he had been so full of hope. Yet now those dreams were gone again. He dropped the letter on the table and pushed it away. Without even realizing it, Laurent fell into a deep sleep. He slumbered through the night without dreaming. When he awoke in the morning, it took him a moment to recall where he was. The fire had long ago burned down, and the plates and glasses he had used the night before were still on the table. It seemed the master had not yet returned home. Feeling guilty for having entered a stranger's home uninvited, his embarrassment overcame him. Rather than wait for the return of the owner, Laurent resolved to slip quietly out of the house and be swiftly on his way. After all, he told himself, the dinner would have gone to waste otherwise. Rising from the upholstered chair, Laurent moved across the chamber and pulled the double doors open. Weak daylight filtered into the entryway, illuminating the austere hallway better than the night before. Stepping self-consciously into the foyer, he tiptoed between the watchful suits of armor, as if they might come alive at any moment and block his path. Glancing at the twin curving staircases, he noticed that their carpet runners appeared neglected and frayed. It seemed no one had lived here for quite some time. He walked lightly across the flagstones to the enormous front door. Reaching for the handles, he pulled with all his strength. It slowly opened once more, revealing a misty courtyard outside. Squeezing himself through the crack and pushing it shut behind him, he straightened his waistcoat, trying to regain some dignity. Escaping his forbidding refuge like a thief in the night felt wrong, yet he vowed to put this entire humiliating journey behind him. In haste, he returned to the alcove where he had left his horse tethered the night before. He was relieved to find her safe. Reaching into his saddlebag, he fed her an apple left over from the provisions Camille had prepared for him. Then, untying the horse, he quietly led her down the stone path he had traveled in the howling wind the previous night. Looking back, he saw the mansion looming darkly in the growing daylight. It was an enormous chateau, long, pale, and rectangular. The central block was flanked by identical wings on either side. The windows were tall and narrow, lining both large floors with rigid precision. They seemed to stare down at him. The sloping, tiled roof bristled with chimneys. Turning away from the imposing sight, he led his horse toward the front gate, taking in the overgrown gardens on either side. As he neared the end of the walkway, he noticed a charming pergola overrun with rose bushes. At its center stood a single bush, bearing the most exquisite pink roses he had ever seen. Suddenly, he remembered his promise to Camille. Determined to keep his word, he eagerly began cutting blossoms with the knife he kept in his bag. One rose would not suffice to excuse the circumstances of his return. He would take them all. So absorbed was he in his task that he did not hear footsteps approaching. But as he stepped back from the bush, now stripped of blooms, he felt he was being watched. Turning, he saw a fierce-looking figure glaring down at him. At first, he thought it a man, yet the being resembled a human only faintly, his face half hidden beneath wild hair, his build tall and unnaturally strong. He wore a wrinkled shirt and breeches, as though he had rushed out unprepared. He looked furious. "What do you think you're doing?" he growled, his voice like that of a wolf. Laurent froze, painfully aware of the bouquet hanging from his hand. He stammered an explanation, saying he believed no one lived here. He thought the roses would not be missed. Seeing no change in the creature's grim expression, he added weakly that he had promised flowers to his daughter. The beastly figure stood in silence, weighing his words carefully. Then, drawing himself to his full height, he said, "You took advantage of my hospitality without asking. You ate my meal. You slept in my chair. All of that I was willing to overlook. But you have now taken every bloom from my most cherished rosebush. It holds great personal meaning for me. There is no other like it, and each flower is priceless in my eyes. I demand you make amends." Laurent's heart sank. He shook his head and admitted he could not pay. He had nothing to give. His stern host regarded him coldly. "In that case, you must work off your debt," he declared. "I require laborers here at my estate." Laurent gaped, searching for another option. "But, sir," he pleaded, "I have 6 children at home. I cannot stay here with you. What will become of them?" The creature was unmoved. "Either you remain to work, or one of your family must take your place," he said. "Take your roses. They are worthless to me now. Return to your family and make arrangements. I expect you or your replacement here within a week. If you do not appear, I will find you." With that, the fierce-looking figure turned sharply and strode back toward the mansion. Never once did he glance back, and Laurent watched him disappear into the chateau. Laurent saw no choice but to go home and tell his children what had happened. He did not know how, but he would have to prepare them to manage without him. Perhaps when the master's temper cooled, he would show mercy and not keep Laurent long in his service. With the storm gone and daylight on his side, Laurent found his way back to the main road and continued toward home. He rode steadily, though slowly, as he considered the news he would have to share. It was a beautiful day. The mist lifted, and the early autumn sun shone cheerfully as though nothing were amiss. Birds sang sweetly overhead, indifferent to his troubled heart. Yet his thoughts were heavy with dread. He reached home late that night. His children greeted him eagerly, expecting gifts. Opening his saddlebags, they rummaged playfully for the promised finery. Regretfully, he handed each a rose instead. Camille accepted hers with delight, admiring its perfection, while the other 5 demanded to see their true presents. That night, around the crowded kitchen table, Laurent confessed all that had happened on his ill-fated trip. He told of the loss of his last fortune and of his grim obligation to the owner of the mysterious chateau. When he concluded that he must return and work off his debt, the older siblings were furious. They pouted and demanded how they were expected to cope in his absence. Camille alone remained silent, her expression unreadable as she pondered. Finally, she called for quiet. Her siblings stared at her in surprise. She was rarely one to speak her mind. Camille calmly declared that she would go to the chateau and take her father's place. Laurent's eyes filled with tears. He protested that he could not, would not allow it. But Camille's reasoning was sound. Her father was needed at home to support the family. She, however, could be spared. She possessed household skills and would manage whatever work awaited her. No, she concluded, there was no other reasonable solution. It was she who would repay the family's debt. It took a day or 2 for Camille to prepare her few belongings. As the rose her father had given her began to wilt, she pressed it into a book to dry, wanting a keepsake to remind her why she was leaving home to serve a frightening stranger in a distant estate. Camille felt nervous about departing from all she knew, yet she was determined to make her father proud. On the morning of her departure, the sky was clear and bright. She and Laurent packed her things into a small cart, hitching it to their faithful mare. The chateau was 2 days away by road, and Laurent knew an inn where they could spend the night. Her siblings gathered outside the cottage to bid farewell. Their faces showed a mix of relief and unspoken admiration. They were glad they would not be left to fend for themselves for long. The journey was somber for father and daughter. The first day passed under fair weather, their night at the inn uneventful. But the second day brought blustering winds and a sullen sky as autumn made its claim on the forest. Brown leaves skittered across their path, and the wind whistled through the trees. Their faithful horse plodded slowly, drawing them nearer to their fate. When Laurent spotted the turnoff to the chateau, his heart broke all the more. Sensing his despair, Camille smiled gently to reassure him. "Do not worry, Father," she said. "I am capable. I will be fine." He nodded, hoping her words would prove true. At last, they arrived at the grim gates of the estate. Laurent knew the moment had come. He pushed the gate open once again, leading the horse through and approaching the forbidding mansion for the second time. Camille stared openly at the sight before her. The vast, overgrown gardens and the towering, austere walls of the house were grander than anything she had ever seen. It was overwhelming, yet strangely beautiful in its severity. As a village girl, she was speechless at the sheer scale of the place. She felt its mystery and permanence deeply, as though the very stones had slept for ages, waiting to be rediscovered. She wondered what tasks she would be asked to perform here and hoped they were not beyond her experience as caretaker of a humble cottage. Laurent halted the cart when they reached the broad front steps. The wind gusted fiercely, as if trying to drive them away from the entrance. Slowly, he climbed the stairs, lifted the heavy iron knocker, and let it fall. Father and daughter waited, expecting the fearsome master to appear. To their surprise, the door creaked open and a boy peeked out. He looked about 13, dressed simply like a villager. Peering at them with frank curiosity, he nodded and asked, "Is one of you the new servant?" Laurent, taken aback, explained that he had brought his daughter Camille to work off the debt in his place. The boy accepted this without surprise, tugging the door wide and motioning for her to come in. He told Laurent to leave her belongings in the foyer, then dismissed him. With that, the boy disappeared into the depths of the house, presumably to announce the arrival of the new servant. With the wind at her back, Camille stepped across the threshold and into her new life. It was an emotional parting for father and daughter, but both tried to appear brave. Laurent turned the horse toward home, the gloomy skies pressing down, and did not look back until the chateau gates were behind him. Then the swaying trees of the forest closed in. Camille stood uncertainly in the echoing hall. The gray daylight streamed through tall windows above the door, but it did nothing to warm the cavernous space. Suppressing a shiver, she edged closer to her trunk, telling herself she must gather her courage. After a few minutes, the boy returned, announcing that the Baron had instructed him to show her to her room. He cheerfully lifted her trunk and began lugging it up the grand staircase. Camille followed, surprised to be going upward rather than down to a kitchen. Perhaps she would be lodged in the attic. Instead, the boy led her into the east wing, their steps silent on thick carpet as they passed rows of portraits. Nobles from bygone eras seemed to gaze at her disapprovingly as if she were an intruder. Camille was so absorbed in their stares that she nearly collided with the boy when he stopped before a door and pushed it open. She stepped inside and was astonished to find herself in the finest bedroom she had ever seen. It was not enormous, and the furnishings were sober, but the canopied bed, rich fabrics, and polished woodwork spoke of great luxury. Noticing a cozy window seat and a small dressing table, she looked around as the boy lit a fire in the grate. When it crackled cheerfully, he dusted his hands and grinned. "I'm Gabriel," he said. "I help the Baron with whatever needs doing. I'm glad you're here. It gets lonely, and I could use the help." Camille thanked him, though she wondered what help truly meant. She asked when she would meet her new master. Gabriel explained the Baron would see her tomorrow and explain her duties. For now, he would bring her a simple supper, and he hoped she would rest well. With that, he vanished as suddenly as he had appeared, closing the door softly behind him. Camille gathered herself and began unpacking her modest belongings. She hung her dresses in the wardrobe and placed her few books on the table beside the bed. Opening the top volume, she found the pressed pink rose within its pages. Smiling sadly, she closed it again and set it aside. Drawing the heavy curtains, she nestled into the pillows of the window seat. From there, she looked out over the courtyard, its gardens wild and creeping up the stone walls. Twilight deepened, and the wind sent debris spinning across the paving. Dark clouds raced past the rising moon, exhausted by her journey and the strangeness of her new life. She drifted into a doze, cocooned in the drapes. A knock at the door roused her. Slowing her breath, she opened it to find a tray on the floor. Bread, cheese, soup, and hot tea. She looked up and down the hall, but no one was there. Gabriel, she realized, moved lightly indeed. Carrying the tray inside, she set it by the fire and ate hungrily. Barely preparing for bed, she crawled under the covers. Within a minute, she was asleep. That night, Camille dreamed strange things. She wandered the dark halls of the chateau, following a large dog. It disappeared into rooms, reappearing seconds later in the corridor. Trying to keep up, she reached a doorway where it had vanished. Inside, she glimpsed the back of a man seated at a desk. He began to turn in his chair, but before his face was revealed, she awoke. Sitting upright, she saw the fire had died down and the sun was streaming through her window. As her mind cleared, another knock came. Gabriel stood outside with a tray. "Good morning, miss," he said politely. "I've brought breakfast. The Baron requests that you meet him in his study once you are finished." An hour later, Camille stood nervously at the door of the very room where her father had once eaten a stolen fireside meal. Inside, she heard the rustle of papers. Clearing her throat, she knocked lightly. The sounds ceased, and a chair scraped across the floor. Moments later, a towering man with a heavy beard appeared. His features were harsh, his face naturally set in a scowl. He was an alarming sight, yet Camille carefully masked her feelings. She bowed her head politely in greeting. The man studied her with a grave expression and gave a curt nod. He gestured for her to sit by the fire. Taking the chair opposite, he said, "So, you are the one to work off your father's debt. Are you familiar with household tasks, cleaning, cooking?" Camille nodded, assuring him that she was. He seemed pleased. Lifting a heavy ring of keys from the table, he explained, "As you see, I have little help here. Gabriel meets my basic needs. His mother brings bread, milk, and eggs daily. He also runs errands in town. But beyond that, no one manages the estate but myself. It is too much work for only Gabriel and me, but we make do." He paused, waiting for her reply. Camille, overwhelmed by the scale of the task, said nothing. He continued, "These keys open most rooms, though few are worth entering. If you need something Gabriel cannot fetch, ask me. Otherwise, I prefer you decide matters for yourself. I spend most of my time in my study or the library." Camille nodded again. The interview seemed to end. He rose abruptly, and she followed, taking the keys with a bow. As she reached the door, he added, "Dinner is at 7. It would be sensible for you to join me." She thanked him and left. Standing in the echoing hall, Camille felt both lost and pressed in upon. She spread the heavy keys in her palm, sensing the quiet authority they carried. Her thoughts were interrupted when Gabriel emerged, grinning. "Would you like a tour?" he asked brightly. Grateful, she agreed, and thus her life as housekeeper of the chateau began. Camille soon learned the Baron had lived alone for many years. Because of his fearsome appearance, the villagers avoided him, spreading cruel tales whenever he appeared in public. Gabriel was his only link to the outside world. The boy explained he had begun by running errands long ago, but had grown to admire the man behind the forbidding face. "The Baron's bark is worse than his bite," Gabriel said firmly. By day, he tended to errands and chores. By night, he returned to his family's cottage at the edge of town. "Truly, miss," Gabriel insisted, "he is fair and kind-hearted." He led Camille through the many rooms and corridors of the vast chateau. Most were cloaked in neglect. Music, bedroom after bedroom, lay under sheets of dust, their fireplaces cold for decades, perhaps centuries. Furniture and belongings were stacked high, cobwebs thick on every corner. The windows admitted only dim light, their panes obscured by grime. Only a handful of rooms were in daily use: the kitchen, the study, the front hall, and most marvelous of all, the library. Gabriel let Camille peek inside while the Baron was elsewhere. She was astonished. A vast chamber opened before her, its high ceiling trimmed in gold. Bookshelves climbed to the rafters, lining every wall but for the windows. Rolling ladders stood ready to carry readers upward, reaching any volume they desired. There were too many books to count, spines in crimson, green, navy, and brown, all begging to be taken down and explored. Camille, though fond of reading, had never imagined such a collection. Gabriel explained the Baron spent most of his time here, and indeed the tables confirmed it. Volumes lay open to particular pages, grouped in stacks. Two worn armchairs hinted at countless hours of study. Gabriel told her solemnly that he was required to keep the fire burning in the grate each day. Camille imagined what it would be like to sink into one of those chairs with a book, breathing the scent of old, ink-filled pages. The thought was intoxicating, but she reminded herself that progress in this house would only come through steady effort. That first day, she and Gabriel dusted the hall and scrubbed the kitchen. The kitchen had long been used only for simple meals, but much was in need of care. Camille, though no expert cook, took pride in making it shine again. She sent Gabriel to town with a list of supplies. Then, standing in the silent kitchen, she set to work. Dusty counters were cleared, pots and pans polished. The once cold space began to feel alive. By the time she was due at dinner, she had roasted a simple chicken. It was not elaborate, but she was proud. With little time to freshen up, Camille returned to her room. Gabriel had rekindled her fire. She washed quickly and donned her best dress. Pulling the curtains for the night, she paused, gazing out. The courtyard lay silent, as if spellbound. Not even a bird stirred. She tucked the curtains together and turned away. Lighting a candle, she made her way down the twilight hall and descended the wide stairs to the dining room. The dining hall was vast for only 2 people. Once, it must have hosted glittering feasts and formal gatherings. Looking up, Camille admired the crystal chandelier, shimmering like a canopy of stars. Gabriel had set 2 places at one end of the long table. The dinner she had prepared was laid out neatly. She was the first to arrive. She did not wait long. The Baron's hulking shape filled the doorway. He nodded briefly in greeting, then motioned for her to sit. Camille took one of the upholstered chairs. "I see you have been busy with Gabriel today," he remarked, raising his brows at the hearty meal before them. "He has carried a heavy burden these years as my only helper. I am glad you will share his work." Camille nodded, uncertain how to answer. When she addressed him as "my lord," he waved it off. "Please call me Antoine," he said. "I am lord of nothing now, save this chateau and its dusty relics." He spoke with dark humor, then looked at her sincerely. "I am sorry you came here under such conditions, but I hope you will be comfortable. I try to be a fair man, and I welcome the company." Camille managed a brief smile. "Would you like me to tidy the library tomorrow?" she asked. "I wasn't sure if I should enter." Antoine thought a moment, then nodded. "That would be fine. And you may borrow any book you wish. As Descartes wrote, the reading of good books is like conversing with the finest minds of past centuries. You may find my library surprisingly magical. It often yields whatever book one seeks." Camille was surprised by his generous offer and refined words. She studied her unfortunate-looking master in a new light. In only one day, her view of her situation had shifted. She was mistress of a great house, free to direct her own work, and now with access to a vast library. Perhaps fate was not as cruel as she had thought. The two ate mostly in silence, the clink of silverware filling the quiet. Later, tucked into her canopy bed, Camille felt hopeful. This lonely estate surely held secrets, and she looked forward to discovering them. Turning onto her side, she drifted into sleep, feeling a warmth kindled within the chateau. The next morning, after tidying the kitchen, Camille cautiously approached the library. She knew the Baron was in his study, and it seemed a good moment to explore under the guise of cleaning. Taking a duster, she moved carefully among the stacks, brushing dirt from tables and shelves. But as she was about to shift a pile of volumes, Antoine appeared in the doorway. "Please, do not disturb the stacks or open books," he said. Camille stepped back quickly, apologizing. "No need," he reassured her. "It looks untidy, I know, but I am in the middle of research, and I cannot lose my place." Then he asked if she had chosen a volume for herself. She admitted she had not, and shyly said she feared she might not understand such important works coming from her humble background. Antoine smiled, spreading his hands. "To know you are ignorant is the beginning of wisdom," he said. Seeing her puzzled look, he added with a wink, "That was Socrates." He crossed the room, picked a slim book from a lower shelf, and handed it to her. "Perhaps you would enjoy more of his thoughts. He believed in asking many questions." Camille thanked him and turned to leave, but then hesitated. "Would it be possible," she asked, to hire villagers to clear the gardens before winter? Antoine looked sorrowful and shrugged. If Gabriel can find any brave enough to enter the gates, you may, but most fear this place. Over the years, wild tales about me have kept them away. That is why I live alone. Camille frowned. Does it not anger you to be treated so unfairly? He lowered his gaze thoughtfully. Once I was better looking and also vain and foolish. It took a misfortune to humble me. Their scorn may be just punishment for my pride. Camille did not press further, but she resolved to learn more of his story in time. For now, she looked forward to reading Socrates after dinner that evening. Camille soon adjusted to life as housekeeper of the chateau and even came to love it. Through persuasion, she convinced Gabriel to hire a few men from the village to clear years of overgrowth from the gardens. She warned them sternly not to touch the pergola roses, for they had been planted by Antoine's mother. Yet she regretted inviting them, for she overheard their cruel gossip. They say he's a monster, one scoffed. Lives like a beast, no manners, unfit for human company, another added. But I'll take his coin, the man finished with a laugh. Camille noticed Antoine at the window, hearing it all. She rushed to close it, anxious to spare him, but he waved her off calmly. I am used to such words, he said. It has been many years since I moved in society. Music. Still, Camille was distressed. How can you bear it, to be so maligned by strangers? He gazed at the books on the table. An Englishman, William Shakespeare, once wrote, Heat not a furnace for your foe so hot that it do singe yourself. By keeping good will toward those who know me not, I ease my own burden. He smiled at her. You may enjoy Shakespeare. His plays are worth reading. Camille pondered his words, looking out at the dreary day. Despite the endless chores awaiting her, Camille still made time to explore. As autumn settled in with crisp days, early sunsets, and cool nights, she wandered the halls by candlelight, using her ring of keys to unlock the countless closed doors. Most revealed bedrooms long abandoned. It was clear the chateau had once welcomed noble guests. Now each chamber stood draped in dust sheets, four-poster beds and fine chairs shrouded in fabric. One day, she discovered a special room, a lady's chamber unlike the others. It was still filled with personal belongings. A dressing table glittered with jars of powder and perfume bottles, catching the afternoon sun. Nearby, elaborate wigs rested on stands, as if waiting for a ball. Opening the wardrobe, Camille gasped at rows of silk gowns and styles from before the Revolution. She brushed a hand lightly across the delicate skirts, afraid they might crumble at her touch. She pictured the elegant woman who must have worn them. Opening a drawer, she found glittering necklaces. One small velvet box held a sapphire ring that sparkled brightly. Quickly, she shut it and slid the drawer closed. She would not risk appearing to steal. With reluctance, she locked the chamber and stepped back into the hall. It was like peering through a portal to happier times, and it was the most beautiful discovery she had yet made. Camille faithfully wrote letters to her father, which Gabriel carried to town with his errands. In them, she reassured him she was well treated and content with her work. Soon, she even began sending money. After her first month, Antoine told her he could not let her continue unpaid. The damage to the rose bush had long since been repaid, he said. He hoped she would remain, and so he offered her a weekly wage. Camille gladly accepted. As Antoine's housekeeper, she felt she had found her calling. Her skills of order and diligence were well used, and her greatest joys became his company and his library. In fact, she often forgot that Antoine was considered unsightly. The only change was that Camille kept his clothes better tended, making him appear more presentable. At times, though, she caught fleeting glimpses of a different man, a normal, pleasant face reflected in a mirror as he passed, or harmonious features while speaking with her. When she blinked, the illusion vanished, and the familiar beastly visage returned. Perhaps, she thought wryly, the magic of the chateau played tricks on her. From time to time, beggars came to the door with winter winds at their backs. In her home village, such people were scorned, rarely helped, but Antoine always instructed her to give them coins. Moved, Camille asked why he showed such charity when the villagers showed him none. He answered with the words of Aristotle, "It is the mark of a noble man to ask no favor, but to be ready to show kindness to others." Then, with sorrow, he added, "I must learn to be more generous. It was my past failings that brought me to ruin." Camille longed to know more, but for the moment he offered no further explanation. That evening, as they dined on stew by candlelight, Camille gathered her courage to ask how he had come to live alone. Antoine hesitated, sighing deeply and leaning back in his chair. After a long sip of wine, he began. "Years ago, I lived here with my mother. My father had died when I was young, and I inherited the estate. I loved my mother. She was kind and lively, the heart of every gathering, yet always gentle. It was her rose bush your father stripped. When she fell ill and passed, I was left to myself. Ashamed, I admit I lived poorly. I squandered money on foolish luxuries and parties. I neglected the estate, left bills unpaid, and failed my servants. Without her good influence, I became worthless to others and to myself. One night, During a feast, my servant told me a woman was at the door begging for food. I, drunk with folly, sent her away, saying she should find work. Before she could be turned out, she forced her way inside. She declared I was cursed for my vanity. She said I would live shunned and unloved, and only through humanity could I be freed. Camille frowned. Humanity? What did she mean? Antoine shrugged. It is the riddle I have wrestled with for decades. My library offers the wisdom of philosophers, poets, scientists, the best of humankind, perhaps by magic. Yet all the brilliance of humanity has given me no release. Camille gazed at him in silence, imagining long years by the fire alone, turning page after page in search of redemption. Breaking the quiet, Antoine forced a smile. As Newton wrote, to arrive at the simplest truth requires years of contemplation. Perhaps one day I shall find it. That night, curled in bed, Camille pieced it together. For all those years, Antoine had studied, reflected, repented. He was no longer the vain man he had been, but she wondered if he would ever escape his solitary prison. She hoped so, for she had grown to admire him deeply. Through the long freeze of winter, Camille and Antoine lived in quiet companionship, with Gabriel, their faithful link to the outside world. Many rooms of the vast mansion remained locked and unused, but the parts they needed were snug and well kept thanks to Camille's diligence. Meals were plain yet hearty. Outside, snow piled high, and bleak winds howled in the empty corridors. Inside, they kept close to their fireplaces, surrounded by books. At last, the first signs of spring appeared. With them came a letter from her father. Her eldest sister had secured a marriage, and the wedding was set in weeks. He asked if the Baron would allow Camille to attend. Laurent would come fetch her, if so. When Camille presented the request, Antoine set down his book. He gazed at her with a sad smile. Of course, he said, you must go. Take all the time you need. As she thanked him, she looked at him anew. Once again, she did not see a beastly face, only a man. She blinked hard, but the vision did not shift. When she left the room, she glanced back once more. He was bent over his reading again, and she pushed the thought aside. Her journey to the wedding was uneventful. Her family greeted her with curiosity, perhaps even respect. They admired the fine clothes she had bought with her wages. It was clear her earnings had helped fund her sister's marriage. The family was no longer seen as impoverished, but respectable once more. Yet Camille felt less at home than before. Though she had been confined to the chateau, her mind had broadened. Her world had grown. By the hearth with her siblings, who gossiped over petty concerns, she felt stifled. She regretted leaving her father again, but was relieved when he parted from her at the gates. She was eager to return to her true home at the estate. Her joy turned to dismay at the state awaiting her. Gabriel answered the door, delighted at her return, but whispered that nothing had gone well since she left. The Baron had grown disheveled, refusing to leave his library. After unpacking, Camille went straight there. Opening the door, she found chaos. Books lay scattered, stacked haphazardly. Empty glasses lined the tables. Antoine slumped in a chair, unshaven and weary. When he noticed her, relief flickered in his eyes. Once more, Camille's vision played tricks. She saw not a beast, but a tired man. Blinking, she forced herself to see him as he was unkempt, forlorn, in need of cheer. In only a few days, Camille restored order. Dust was cleared, rooms set right. The Baron's mood brightened instantly at her presence, yet Gabriel confessed privately that her absence had broken him. The Baron had sunk into despair, forgetting even to eat. With spring bursting around them, sadness soon lifted. Camille was glad she had arranged the garden's clearing earlier. Now they bloomed in beauty, the old designs of Antoine's mother revealed. Flowers in every color opened. Birds sang sweetly each morning. Camille and Antoine spent afternoons reading under the pergola. Often he released Gabriel early so he might enjoy time with friends. Camille opened the mansion's windows wide, airing the stale rooms. Life in the estate felt renewed, as if it had turned a corner. As summer neared, another letter came from her father. Her other sister was to be wed. Again, Camille was invited. She felt torn. Duty pressed her to attend, but she dreaded leaving Antoine once more. At last, she devised an unusual plan. She suggested Antoine escort her to the wedding, then lodge at a nearby inn. He was aghast. "Have you not seen how people react to me?" he asked. Camille countered that her village was far away. No one there knew the tales about him. Privately, she no longer saw him as hideous, but as the wise, kind man she had come to know. He resisted firmly, but when she vowed not to go without him, he yielded at last. Though he dreaded the ordeal, she pressed ahead. She sent Gabriel to the tailor, ordering a new suit. She had long noticed Antoine still wore outdated finery. The new fashion, clean and simple, would make him appear dignified. Rooms at the inn were booked. The carriage was prepared. On the appointed day, Gabriel wished them well. He had never seen the Baron leave the estate. Promising to mind the house, he bid them goodbye. Their journey was swift, covered in a single summer day. The forest glowed with bright leaves. Sunlight filtered through branches, birds sang joyfully, and breezes whispered above. At first Antoine was silent, resisting the trip. But soon their talk turned to books, and the miles passed in lively discussion. Camille, watching him from the side, thought she sat beside a charming man. She let the illusion remain. By twilight, they reached her family's cottage. As they climbed down from the carriage, her siblings crowded the door, staring rudely. Laurent alone managed a polite greeting, thanking Antoine for bringing Camille, but Camille flushed with shame when one brother whispered a crude joke, sending her sister into giggles. Antoine soon departed for his lodgings, and Camille allowed herself to be drawn inside. Though she joined the talk of preparations, her mind worried for him at the inn. That night, she fell asleep thinking of him, wishing only for the ordeal to pass so they could return to the chateau, which she now truly called home. At the church the next day, her fears proved true. The pair sat in silence, aware of stares from all around. The small building felt stifling, the congregation's eyes upon them. Afterward, the celebration spilled onto the village green. There was cake, punch, flowers, and music. Children played on the grass. Ladies chatted politely. But Camille and Antoine were outsiders. She stayed close to him, nodding stiffly at neighbors who once had taught her to bake and garden. Now they whispered behind hands, watching knowingly. Not one kind word was offered to Antoine, who met all with a calm smile. Her family, too, ignored them. At last, Camille overheard two men. "He may have money," one sneered, "but he'll never find a wife with a face like that." "Sad," said the other, "courting his own servant girl." The words were the final straw. Camille strode to the center of the gathering. She raised her voice so all could hear. "I asked the Baron to come because I thought you good people. I believed his character and kindness would speak for him. But I see I was wrong. None of you deserve his notice. Let me tell you this. Antoine is a better man than any among you. I would choose him above all others 100 times over. That is the truth." Silence fell. All eyes turned from her to Antoine, then back. As Camille looked toward him, she saw the strangest sight. Where the beast had stood, there was now a handsome man, smiling at her with gratitude. She blinked, tried to clear her vision, but it did not change. The wild hair, the harsh features, the hulking form, all were gone. Before her was a man as comely as any she had known. And whether by magic or by her own heart's vision, the villagers seemed unaware of the change. They greeted Antoine warmly, smiling at Camille as if nothing had been amiss. It was as though the cruel episode had never occurred. The beast was gone forever. In that quiet triumph, Antoine's enchantment was finally broken. All his years of study had not freed him, for he had misunderstood. It was not wisdom in books, but the humanity he had learned through kindness, patience, and forgiveness that won Camille's heart and released him. Soon after, Camille and Antoine sat beneath the pergola, admiring the rose bush his mother had planted, now blooming in abundance once more. Twilight fell, crickets sang, and they shared the summer evening in peace. Antoine sat straighter, reaching into his pocket. He drew out the sapphire ring Camille had once admired in secret. "You were the only one who saw me as I truly was," he said. Quoting a book, he added, "As Copernicus wrote, 'In the middle of all stands the sun.' You are that sun to me." With a smile, he slipped the gem onto her finger. Camille laughed softly and accepted. By the end of summer, Camille and Antoine exchanged vows in the courtyard of the chateau. The roses perfumed the air, birds sang in the trees, and the house no longer seemed desolate. Camille looked at Antoine with gratitude, feeling she belonged utterly. This was no longer the bleak estate where she had once arrived in fear. Through kindness, patience, and the pursuit of wisdom, they had found joy. Together, they had discovered love, and at last, both were home.